Welcome. Let's just get right into it and talk about an issue that everybody is dealing with in one way or another, coronavirus.
Yeah.
How do you think the federal government has handled it? What are two things you think they've done well and two things you've not done well?
Well, I think to start with positives, I think, listening to the scientists now and trying to make sure that people are staying healthy. I know it's more of an indirect thing if you're looking from a federal standpoint by giving the power to local governments and municipalities in terms of mask mandates and what have you. Things that they've done poorly, I think it seemed like in real time back in January and February when we first started hearing about what was happening in China, from the top down, they just kind of ignored the facts, didn't really do much to get out in front of it. Now, I know just listening last night on the debates, they're going back and forth of what was happening back then and what they knew and how much information they had. But from the start, it just seemed like it was kind of bungled. You can't say that you are actually trying to prevent something from happening when you're, from the president's side, just kind of ignoring the facts and making fun of it and, coming up with all kinds of different catchphrases to make people laugh about something as serious as the coronavirus. So I think the government's trying the best they can. I don't really have an answer for, what they did or didn't do. I think they, in a nutshell, they dropped the ball to begin with, and now we're all kind of playing catch up in terms of keeping our public safe.
You think there needs to be a federal mandate for wearing a mask with penalties?
No, absolutely not. I think a mask mandate, any law that's unenforceable, I think is kind of a waste of time, really. And I would not want anyone to be ticketed for wearing a mask. I've been wearing a mask, my family and I, when we go out in public and we can't maintain our social distance, and that's, the rights of every individual. I think making it a mandate and enforcing that with penalties would do more harm than it would help at this point.
Has it become a political issue? People
very much
politicized.
Very, very much so. I think, had the politicians just listened to the health experts and followed their recommendations from the beginning, maybe we wouldn't be in as much of a mess. And but that's all hindsight. But I think using this as a political weapon, I think is part of the problem with our political world that we live in today.
So a big issue before Congress is this, second round of stimulus payments. What needs to happen to get the economy strong again and back up and running?
I think what needs to happen is people just need to continue, purchasing. I mean, that's how the economy works. The capitalistic society that we live in is based on all of these markets, whether it's the stock market, whether it's your pension, and people need money to do that. I think, for me, in terms of the CARES Act, I think it was a good first step. I still don't understand, and I've reached out to Susan Brooks a multitude of times trying to figure out what happened to the conversation of like pausing mortgages and rent for individuals to free up that capital to put back into the economy. And no one seems to be talking about that, but I'm not sure why that's not an option at this point, especially for those people who have actually lost their jobs because of directly related to COVID-19.
Right. What needs to happen to reduce the partisan division we see right now?
Elect a libertarian. I mean, elect someone who's actually not involved in politics. That's part of, even before coronavirus, when I decided to get in this campaign, it was to bring people together. I'm not trying to be a divisive person, because the people that I've talked to, the people that I know, we're all more similar than we are different. And if we want to get hung up on things that divide us, we're going to continue this division that's just spreading across our nation and making the disparity between people even wider. So I think we need to elect actual people to political offices and not just regular politicians. I think, and that's part of the reason why I'm running for office, is to give people that opportunity. If we're all as tired as we say we are with politicians, then we need to do something about it. And I just ask people to give me a little bit of their time to get to know me so they could vote for, at least for this one race, vote for a person and not just a party.
Mm. Let's hit a topic that divides a lot of folks. As you're talking about, people shouldn't be divided, but abortion choice, people on both sides of it. What's your take on this issue? Would you support placing any restrictions on abortion?
No, I think I believe in parental rights. So that means I'm pro-choice. I don't think it's the government's job to tell you whether you can or can't do anything to yourself. And because as a parent, when you have that child and maybe you knew you didn't want that child to begin with and you give it to an adoption agency, sometimes that works out for that child and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get lost in the system. And I don't think it's the job of any government to tell two consenting adults what they should or should not do to their child, be that child be born or unborn. I mean, so for me, I'm definitely a pro-choice candidate. I want to protect the rights of individuals in making that decision. And I don't think there should be, I know Vice President Pence has been, making all kinds of headway with abortions on demand or whatever he's calling that. I think, that's just, again, politicizing something that's an individual decision. And, my neighbors shouldn't have anything to say with what happens to my wife and I and our children in terms of how we raise them.
There's been a lot of discussion about expanding the Supreme Court, with the recent death of Justice Ginsburg and now the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. What do you think of that? What do you think about about expanding the court? Where do you stand on that?
I stand on the side of not expanding the Supreme Court because I don't believe in expanding the government in any way. I think as long as there's a odd number and we always get a decision from the courts, whether it's 5-4 or they talk about going to 11, so 5-6. As long as if a court proceeding gets to the level of the Supreme Court, as long as they can rule on it on the grounds of protecting our Constitution, I don't think packing the courts. I don't support packing the courts.
So the Supreme Court is going to be taking up the Affordable Care Act the week after the election. Would you vote to amend the ACA or scrap it altogether? And if you did, do you have a plan and some ideas about what should replace it?
Sure. I think any piece of legislation or any piece of mandate probably needs to be looked at. I don't know all the ins and outs of the Affordable Care Act. All I know is that in this country, healthcare is a right. It shouldn't just be a privilege and people shouldn't be priced out of healthcare. So for me, if I earn your vote and I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm going to go there to make sure that everyone has healthcare and everyone has access to healthcare. I think from the medical professionals that I've talked to over the course of my campaign, one of the biggest concerns they have is just access. And there's even bureaucratic things they talk about just in terms of the sheer volume and the lack of individual care they're actually allowed to give to each of their patients on a daily basis. I think we need to allow the doctors to be doctors. I think we need to allow people to have insurance, and those who are underinsured or not insured, we all end up paying for it anyway. So we're all going to use health insurance. We all need to pay for it in some way or another.
Okay. Another topic coming out of this summer, specifically in the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police. We've heard a lot of calls for police reform and defunding the police. What role do you think Congress should play in either of those measures? How do you feel?
I think the role that Congress can play is in reforming the police. I would never support defunding the police. It's kind of like education. There are areas in our police force that probably money's being wasted, and it could be turned into trainings of different types of procedures when they come to different events. I think I've heard a lot of talk about kind of retraining and using. It's kind of like what happens in education. We've got like an emotional disability team, people that are trained to deal with students who have, they're at that point in their day where they can't handle being around the other kids. So you need to do what's best for everyone. So I think if we can get out in front of some of these issues, especially with mental health, and not, allow police to keep running to the call, which they always do, when they know that those are sometimes volatile situations, and use of force has been used in an unfortunate series of events throughout not just this year, but over the course of my lifetime. I mean, police officers are called to serve and protect, and we know that there's an issue with some of the procedures that they have in place in terms of how they deal with different issues. So we need to get out in front of it and give our police officers and our first responders all the tools that they can to de-escalate situations before they become a life or death situation. So, I mean, if it's in an effort of full transparency, it's making sure that, all police officers and all their cars should have some type of video recording equipment so we can see. And I mean, I think that's, when we talk about being transparent in government, that's one big step in making sure that those body cameras are always on, and that they're not, and that they're functional. So we, not necessarily me and you, but the people who do make these calls that are involved in the task force on those levels have all the information at hand, and it's not just, secondhand stories.
Is systemic racism a problem in this country? And if you think it is, what needs to be done to address it?
I believe it is. I believe when you look at the data and you just look at incarceration rates and, the amount of minorities that are incarcerated for whatever offense that they might be, usually it's drug related. So for me, I would start there. And for my campaign, one of the big ideas that I do have is just legalizing marijuana and decriminalizing and looking through for simple possession and allowing those people to re-enter society and not have a huge red flag on their work, their applications for work. So they're not immediately disqualified just because they did spend time in jail for a possession charge, let's say. So I think systemic racism, and almost it's a systemic racism, classism, or just allowing people to be taken advantage of by those people in power. So I think that's why we need to look at putting people in power that aren't there, like myself, someone who wants to be there for the greater good, not just keeping people in their preordained boxes, so we can just kind of manipulate people into submission almost. I know that's probably kind of radical, but it's what I feel.
It's your thoughts. So, several reports came out this week talking about the parents of 545 children separated at the U.S. border still can't be found. So I don't know if you saw those reports. It was pretty widely reported on this week. Reaction to that at a gut level as a dad, and what needs to be done to reunite those children with their parents?
Well, as a father, it breaks my heart, honestly, to think that someone was trying to get into this country, they had their kids taken from them, and were probably told, well, you'll see each other again, and now there's 544 or 545 kids that are separated from the parents, and we have no idea where they're at. And I think that kind of talks more to government dysfunctionality, the fact that somehow we had 545 families come here, and now we can't locate the parents of these children. I think that's heartbreaking on a multitude of levels. And in terms of what I would do to try to fix that, I guess it just comes back to, paperwork and processing. And maybe it's not great to separate families when they come here just because you're an adult and you're a child. Maybe keep all those people together. So I think, as a father, it's truly heartbreaking. And I feel for, those 545 families, because that should never happen, especially in this country.
Let's switch to Second Amendment. Should Americans be allowed to own semi-automatic and automatic weapons?
Some. We'll start there. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that all American citizens should have the right to buy firearms. But I think we're past the point in the history of our country. We need to admit that we do have a gun problem, and that gun problem is multifaceted, but it's an illegal gun problem, and it's a automatic high capacity gun problem. It really is. I'm not a hunter. I don't know everything about guns, and I still don't understand why some of the people that I know have these automatic rifles. They talk about protecting themselves from a tyrannical government. And my comment to that is always, if it comes between you and your automatic weapon and the marauders on the street, we've gone too far as a society. You know, that all hope is lost at that point. So for me, I think we need common sense gun laws. To go back to mental health, you know, I think there are a generation of students that I have taught that have been labeled as emotionally disabled, meaning that they can't control their emotions, and sometimes that emotion comes out in rage. Well, if they have legally been identified their entire lives with that, when they turn 18, I'm sorry, but you probably should not be owning any type of weapon, especially one that's not used for hunting. So I think it's really it's an interesting debate when I have it with people. You know, I support people's rights to own a rifle and go out and hunt deer like people in my family do. But I think it's really kind of gotten out of hand when you can go to a gun show and walk out with an arsenal that can rival your local police. So I think it's time that we stop just kicking the can down the street and saying that, you know, everyone's allowed to have guns, and actually look at, you know, what's best for our society. In our society, we need to just, number one, admit that we have a problem with guns, and then number two, start tackling. And then I think that comes with common sense gun laws.
So what do you see as the biggest issue facing constituents in the 5th district? What would you deal with on behalf of them first?
Well, I've got three things that if anyone in the 5th district votes for me, every day the other 434 members of Congress are going to hear from Ken Tucker about equality, education, and our environment. You know, outside of that, it's whatever the big issues are the day. You know, I got politically involved probably a decade ago as a teacher for education, just seeing what was happening at the state level, and I was just, you know, fed up with it. And you know, you talk to your friends in the schools, and then you talk to people on the streets or in your family, and you realize that the majority of people believe in education, and they believe that it's being underfunded, that there's waste in education. So for me, it's those three things, you know, education and equality. I think it's 244 years we've been doing this experiment of America, and the fact that we still haven't figured out equality for all, I think is almost, it would be laughable if it wasn't so upsetting. The fact that I can't look at my daughters and tell them that they're going to have the same experience in this country just because they're female, and the fact that, you know, and that's coming from a white guy in a white family. So it just gets worse when you talk about bringing in people of different ethnic groups. So I would work tirelessly every day to make sure that no one is discriminated against based on gender issues, racial issues, sexual orientation issues, you know, any way that the government likes to kind of keep people separate. I would work to break those barriers down. You know, I've made the mistake in my life, Emily, that even as a kid, I've been fascinated with what is America. And when I've read their founding documents, you know, you can't get, I think it's 11 words into the Declaration of Independence before we start ostracizing people. So I've read all those documents non-literally. Unfortunately for all of us, we live in a very much literal, litigious world. So until we can actually stop just giving all these rights to men or rich men and make it equality across the board, it's going to be an uphill battle. So, and then talking about the environment, you know, I want to preserve what we have. I want to protect what's left and hopefully restore it. I want to create new agricultural markets. I want to seek out new alternative energy sources. You know, Indiana's in the forefront of wind cultivation, and that's great. And I think we can do more. You know, I think the nation itself is starting to turn to more renewable, especially with, you know, residential solar power. So I would do everything I can to make sure that if you would like to get involved in this and put solar panels up on your house, that it's not going to, you can afford it, and maybe you can actually make money by selling it back to to Citizens Energy or wherever your electric grid, Duke Energy, whoever it might be. So I want a lot more for everyone. And I want a lot more for our country. And in terms of education, equality, and the environment, you'll get a lot more from me. It'll be everything that I've heard from politicians my entire life that said that they're going to do something about that. You'll actually have a person in Congress every single day who won't forget that that's why he's there.
So what do you see as the biggest threat to our country, the thing that keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think number one, misinformation, whether it's from a foreign entity or just your friend down the street. You know, the fact that we as a society have gotten to a point where if we see something, we don't necessarily do our due diligence in researching it. You know, the fact that, you know, even the president can retweet stuff and then, you know, it's the president, so people tend to believe that. Well, you know, that's not the case. So I think, and that goes into like partisan politics. You know, partisan politics has gotten us this far, and I'm unhappy with it, and that's kind of why I'm running. You know, I think, you know, climate change and the climate crisis, you know, and inequalities in healthcare, you've kind of seen with COVID-19. You know, could you imagine if all of a sudden, you know, the scientists are right, and in 50 years, the coast starts rising and people are being displaced? It'll be a huge problem. And my entire life, the scientists have been telling us that that's going to happen and that we need to start taking steps. And what have we done recently is kind of take steps backwards and refuse science. And I fear for future generations because of what we're doing to this planet, be it at a political level or even an environmental level, in terms of polluting and doing things that we know are wrong or have been told are wrong and fixable still at this point.
Do you support term limits? And if you do, how long do you think somebody should serve? How long would you serve if elected?
I absolutely support term limits. I think in terms of the president, I think, you know, 8 years is probably it seems to be spot on. As far as Congress, I don't know the number there. For me, I've told people, you know, jokingly, but honestly, you know, I would support a 2-term limit for a congressman. You know, let him get in there. And, you know, for me, if I get elected and if I can do literally nothing in terms of education, equality, and the environment like I want to, I would probably just walk away anyway. I mean, if it's as hard as people say it is to govern for no apparent reason outside of the fact that people don't want to talk with one another, you know, then that just shows me that it's broken and it needs to be, you know, fixed somehow. So I don't have exact numbers, Emily, in terms of what that would be, but I would always go back with, you know, if the president only gets 2 terms, so then maybe it's, you know, maybe it's 2 terms for everyone. So that'd be 2 terms as president, 2 terms for senators, 2 terms for congressional representatives. And I know that's, you know, 8 years, 12 years, and 4 years only, but, you know, I think sometimes it seems as if this whole campaign of mine has been a little bit of an experiment to see, you know, how does someone get elected? I'm not taking money, and that is a detriment to me, but I'm not taking money, not because I can't raise it, because I don't want it. Because I don't want to have all the strings that go along with those people who are, you know, they get elected, and then I've read books, you read interviews, and all of a sudden you've just got people over here telling you exactly what you're supposed to do, because if you're not, we're going to take away the money. So the people that I've talked to and that'll listen to me, they think that's a start, you know, not allowing elections to be bought and asking people, you know, like myself to earn people's vote and not just buy it.
So along that vein, well, a little bit, and speaking of influence, when it comes to elections, what should we do to address foreign interference in our elections?
It's a great question. I think when you look at foreign interference, as far as I know, are you talking more of like social media and just throwing like disinformation,
Correct.
things like that?
Correct.
Well, I think there's very little that, you know, we can do at this point. That's kind of up to those individual companies. And I know Facebook and Twitter are the ones that I've just got on for this campaign, and they're fact checking and things like that. So I think that's a step in the right direction. But I don't honestly think that we can, because if you watch, like I watch WTHR almost every night, and over the last few weeks, all I see are negative campaigns, basically, say 80% negative, 20% actual politicians talking about the issues, but they're just throwing out all the stuff that people say, right? Because they don't necessarily, they're a PAC, so we'll just see if it sticks. Well, I think there's a problem with that too. So I think it's a multifaceted attack in terms of disinformation to the American people, especially during election years. It's not new, but in this digital age, we have to be more proactive in disseminating what is true and what's false. And that really comes back to, the individual is just kind of doing their own individual research and making sure that they are looking at facts as opposed to just alternative facts or whatever, people like to call those things these days.
That's the phrase this year, right? The facts.
One of them, right?
One of them. And you've kind of talked about this, but what's been the single biggest factor in influencing your desire for public service?
Well, like I said, there's two. It's just fighting for education and educators, because I think the one constant that we've seen in this country is education is the great equalizer in any society. And our education system is not equal. It's scary to see how unequal or how different your educational experience can be just based on where you live. I think, the fact that depending on which township you live in, and it can open up doors or it can close doors for you. The fact that we've allowed ourselves to think that basically defunding education and making it harder for schools to do what they know is right. I think we need to do a lot in terms of fixing the state funding formula. I think we need to get rid of all those wasteful things that we do as educators are forced to do by the state, like standardized testing. You're talking about millions of dollars a year, hours and hours and hours, not just taking the test, but preparing for this test. I mean, it takes weeks to go through this, to get set up for the test, to get the kids, in the right places. So for me, in education, I kind of forgot the question before I went off on my education tangent, but yeah, I think it worries me that we're just kind of so haphazardly allowing education to just be, continue to be at risk.
So you think seeing that has been an influence in you wanting to?
Yeah, and then now looking, since as soon as I stopped teaching, I stayed at home with my daughters and just kind of looking, this was right in 2016 basically is when that happened. And just kind of really being able to take in everything that was the 2016 election and not appreciating many of the people that were running, and definitely not the people that got elected. And I'm running for my daughters because just like as a teacher, I'm trying to model the behaviors that I think are going to be beneficial for the future. So this whole thing is basically for my daughters. And it's crazy. They're 4 and 5 years old. And I take them with me these little events, and they know that I'm running for Congress. And we've been talking about votes, and we've been talking about, democracy and how all this stuff works. And, I think it's good. And when I, as much as not many people know what I'm doing, the only thing that I need is to look at my daughters and my wife, and they smile, and I can see it in their eyes that they appreciate what I'm doing, because I've lent the last year of my life to this campaign. I've done everything I can to put myself out in front of voters to let them know that at least in this one race, you have a third option. So if people are as disenfranchised with the other one, let's stop just voting for the lesser of two evils and vote for a person that you actually believe is doing this for the right reason, as opposed to the person who has the most signs or the most damning commercials on TV or on the radio. So yeah, for me, getting involved in politics started with education, but now being a father, it has everything to do with the future of my children.
You touched on this a little bit, but there's so much discussion right now of red states, blue states. You look on Facebook, social media, such division, no matter what the topic is, it seems. Do you see us as a divided country? And if you do, what would you do to bring us together? What can be done? What should be done to bring us together?
Well, I think in terms of, there are fault lines, if you will, in this country on a variety of things, politics being one of them. But that's just kind of what we've done with this two-party system. You can be all in on one side or all in on the other side. And that's the natural fault right there in the middle. If they're not willing to work together, then I mean that's just going to make that divide grow even farther. It's, you know, the war, you know, the Black Lives Movement this summer that continues. You know, there's a fault line on racial inequalities, you know, and education. You know, there's a war on the poor. You know, there are so many different things that we can allow ourselves to go down that rabbit hole and just, you know, keep whatever we have and not let anybody else in. But what I'm asking people to do is it trickle down diplomacy, if you will. I think it starts with our elected officials, and just looking around at just the two people that I'm running against. You know, they don't mention me, and that's fine, because I wouldn't want them talking about me the way they talk about each other. But, you know, if that's what we're allowing it to happen, you know, why would we think that anything's going to get better? So for me, I offer complete transparency. You know, part of my campaign, it's not selling the Libertarian Party, even though that's the party that I am on the ticket of. I'm selling myself as a person who wants to do good, to hopefully see good happen in this world. And I don't shy away from any questions, you know, as difficult as some of them are. And the greatest thing that I have found is just saying, I don't really know what you're talking about. Explain it to me, right? Teach me what it is that you're talking about so I can be informed. And if I need to go look it up, you know, then I'll go look it up. So I want to work with people. I don't want to fight with people. So I'm going to go there. If you really want to, people want to see how government works. And I think if you really want to see how government works, put somebody in there that has to work with both sides, or he's not going to get anything done. Because I guarantee you, I won't shy away from anyone, and I'll let everyone know exactly what it is that I'm doing and why it is I'm not able to do those things. You know, whether it's individual persons or lobbyists or groups or whatever is out there that's not allowing the American people everything that they want. Because I think the American people want to be educated. They want to be equal. They want the environment to stop being polluted. And they want our air to be clean. They want our drinking water to be consumable. And it's just not happening the way that we have everything set up. So for me, I'm just selling myself to the people as an honest, caring, compassionate human being, because that's who I am.
Well, Ken, thanks for, you know, taking the time to share that, share a little bit about who you are, and share your take on some of the issues that are impacting Hoosiers. We appreciate it.